By the time Europeans arrived in the early 16th century, most of the large Native American urban civilizations had all but disappeared. What happened? Well, these cultures peaked in the 12th and 13th centuries, and that's a couple hundred years before the Europeans arrived. And this is what we understand by looking at tree rings and other. In the 15th century, there was a warming up of the earth, some environmental crisis, so an ecological environmental crisis. Crops means that it was harder for people to get food, that it was people were unable to feed people in urban centers, and so more people left the urban centers for rural villages, and the towns are eventually abandoned. And this ecological change turned people from cooperation towards competition. There was intense warfare over materials. Eventually, the Mississippian culture, the ones that was the foundation of Cahokia, they left the Mississippian civilization. They founded the Iroquois Nation and the Huron Nation even further north. In the southwest, in what is New Mexico now, the Anasazi Indians, they became the Hopi Indians. And if we look at the population in 1492, there are about 50 million Native Americans in 1492 versus about 80 million Europeans. So they're on par. There's about as many Europeans in the world as there are Native Americans. But if we look ahead to 1800, all of a sudden there are 180 million Europeans and only 9 million Native Americans. What happened? What is going on here? Now certainly Europeans had a lot of advantages. They had gunpowder and guns, they had metal tools, especially steel tools, they had crossbows and armors, they had weapons, they had the oxen plow, horses, large domesticated animal, including cows, oxen, pigs, sheep. They also had a large immunity to diseases from a close association with those animals, especially to smallpox, malaria, and bubonic plague. All of those are endemic to Europe. That means that people got them, large percentage died, but they gathered some immunity from just generations upon generations having them as childhood diseases. Now, the Native Americans also had some advantages. They have the disadvantage of having gold and silver, and only having bows and arrows of stone tools, and only some animals that are not, although domesticated, aren't particularly useful, like guinea pigs, turkeys, llamas, and dogs. But they do have the advantage that they know North America, they know the crops, they know the seasons, and they know the horticulture, that is the plants. Disadvantage is they don't have immunity to the diseases from those particular domesticated animals that have existed in Europe. Today, demographic historians estimate that before 1492, there were about 50 million Native Americans. 40 years ago, most historians believe that the number was closer to 10 million. So historians have changed their mind, and they argue about this case all the time. Even some today say that Native Americans, there would have been in 1492 closer to 100 million. So how do we make these numbers? Well, demographic historians base their estimates of native population on archaeology of towns and cities. The size of the towns, how many people could live in those towns, how many towns there were probably in a region based on how many deer paths there existed. They compare that to the carrying capacity of the land based on the agricultural techniques. In America, there needed less land to grow the crops to feed the people because the crops produced more and could feed more, and they had better crop rotation. So if you take a look at this is crop productivity per hectare. That's 1 hectare is 2.5 acres. So American crops, those are crops that are traditionally grown in America, is maize, that's corn, potatoes, and cassava. Now those have a much better productivity. They produce more crop than the equivalent European crops, wheat, barley, and oats. So what does this mean? Right? What does it mean that the American crops are more productive than European crops? I'll let you think about that.